Open with a word of prayer. Gracious Lord, as we gather here today, we gather in your name and we give thanks, Lord, that what you have done is you have given us your word, that you have been inspired that word through your Holy Spirit to be written down so that we may read it and that we may just take it all in, that we may speak to not just our minds, but speak to our hearts. So, Lord, we give thanks for this opportunity you have laid before us to continue to study your word as we are looking at the miracles in John. Lord, so we just ask you to bless our time together. Lord, just may it be beneficial to us in our faith walk and our ability to share who you are and what you have done in our lives. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well, all right. We talked last week, if you remember, we defined what a miracle was. We defined that really as something that only God could do. That there could have been no human type intervention. Okay, and as I was explaining this morning. To Ron, we talk about things like raising Lazarus from the dead. You know, he was dead 4 days in the tomb, and they believed that after 3 days that somebody was dead. There was no way they could come back to life. And then what does Jesus do? Jesus raises him. It's a miracle, something only God can do. And so, I know we look out and we look at healings that happen. And so I really couldn't come up with a question, so disregard my question there. But, we see healings that happen, and a lot of times, something, a healing takes place, and we say, wow, that is a miracle. Well, in reality, what do we call that? Remember we called that last week? God's starts with a P. Providence. Okay, God's providence, that he has provided everything in this world for our good, right? And so he's provided the means by which these kinds of things happen, these healings happen. So today we're going to look at the second miracle in the book of John. It's Jesus healing the official's son. Okay, now. I think as we read this section, this miracle, about this miracle, one of the things commentators do is they recognize the similarity in the healing of the official's son and the healing of the servant of the centurion. Okay, and so just notice that as we read today. But the similarity, I think, we can only describe as kind of modern conjecture. This is kind of what we think, because there are significant differences in understanding one is a son, and that relationship between father and son is different than between, say, a centurion and a servant, somebody who, in essence, works for them. One speaks of an official, one speaks of a military officer, so there's just kind of subtle differences. Then there's the place of the request. One request was made in Cana, okay, the other in Capernaum, okay. There's also a time difference. So these and other differences to lead us to understand that they're not the same event. Now, this second miracle in Galilee happens in the same place as the first in John's Gospel. Okay, the first being in Cana, right? Changing the water into wine, we looked at last week. And when that miracle happened that we studied last week, only a few knew about it, right? It was only the servants that, they were told to fill the water jugs, right? And so they were told to keep it a secret. Of course, you never know what happens. I think we all have eighth commandment issues kind of going on all over the place. But anyhow, they were told not to talk about it. And so now what happens is this second miracle now builds on the first. Okay? Because the report of Jesus' arrival now is spreading pretty rapidly, not just in Cana, but also in the surrounding towns, which would include Capernaum, okay? So we're going to talk about why this popularity spread so quickly. Now, the miracle, as I said, involves an official that's thought to be part of Herod Agrippa's entourage, but we're given very little information about him. We don't know his title, so we don't know what he does. We just know he's an official, right? We don't know actually whether he's in the military or not. You know, it's sort of like that. I've told this joke to a few people, so bear with me if you've heard it before. But, you know, there was a man who tells his wife, he says, "Hey, did you hear Joe got in an accident?" And she's like, "No, is he okay?" And he says, "Well, I don't know. All I know is Joe got in an accident." "Well, did they take him to the hospital?" "I don't know. All I know is Joe got in an accident." "Well, you know, is he going to really be okay?" "No, all I know is Joe got in an accident." That's the kind of thing here, you know, that you know, we know he was an official, but that's all we know. So if you ask me about that, all I can tell you is it was an official. That's all I know. Okay? But here we've got this official, and this official has a need. Okay? A need that he believed that only Jesus could help him with. Okay? That only Jesus could help him with. So I want to take a look at the lesson. We're going to read the whole thing, and then we're going to walk through it. So turn to John chapter 4. And we are going to, I want to actually start the reading at verse 43. But we're going to read 43 through the end of the chapter. So I get somebody to pick that up for me.
After 2 days, he departed from Galilee, for Jesus himself had testified that a prophet has no one of his own home. So when he came to Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him, having seen all that he had done in Jerusalem at the feast, for they too had gone to the feast. So he came again to Cana in Galilee, where he was made water wine, and at Capernaum, where there was an official whose son was ill. When this man had heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So Jesus said to him, "Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe." The official said to him, "Sir, come down before my child dies." And Jesus said to him, "Go, your son will live." The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him, and he went on his way. As he was going down, his servants met him and told him that his son was recovering. So he asked them the hour when they began to get better, and they said to him, "Yesterday, at the 7th hour, the fever left him." The father knew that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, "Your son will live." And he himself believed, in all his household. This was now the second sign that Jesus did when he had come to Galilee, come from Judea to Galilee.
All right, thanks. All right. So we have in verses 43 through 45, do we know why did Jesus depart for Galilee? And then what was his welcome like? So do you know why? Any idea why he departed?
Because a prophet's not welcome in his own land.
Yeah, I mean, he just has been in his hometown, and they basically shunned him. So, he had to leave. But also what was happening was he was starting to get this pressure from the Pharisees, and his welcome was almost, when he got to Cana, back to Cana, the welcome was almost the exact opposite of what he experienced in Nazareth, right? Shunned there they were kind of welcoming him. And so so here in John's Gospel, Jesus has been in Samaria a while. And so now he's starting to make this move from Judea to Galilee. And during this time, what's happening is the Pharisees, they're watching. You know, they're like the guys hiding behind the trees, just kind of keeping an eye on what's going on. All right? And it's like when Jesus really understands this threat that is now being presented, you know, what does he say a lot of times? He says, you know, like he said at the wedding in Cana, what did he say? He said, my hour is not yet come. All right, so he knows this threat is out there, so he starts leaving. He knows it's time to leave Judea. So now, having left Samaria, he gets this wonderful reception in Galilee, where John tells us he's at for our lesson today. That the Galileans, I mean, they received him. Why? Because they had seen all that he had done in Jerusalem, right? And so they've been kind of witnessing what Jesus has been doing, you know, and he may not have been received in his hometown, but they had a completely different view of who he was. Now, when John talks about the things he had done in Jerusalem, okay, here's where some people kind of get wrapped around the axle. Okay, what he's talking about is, you know, is if we go back to John chapter 2, which we'll do here in a minute, what happens in John chapter 2 is Jesus overturns the money changers' tables. All right, and everybody says, wait a minute. That's too early in Jesus' ministry. That doesn't happen until the end, right? So I want to take a little short digression here. Okay, I want to talk about what you see happening here is we have Matthew, Mark, and Luke are referred to as what we call the synoptic gospels. They are gospels that really kind of go together. All right. But one of the things the synoptics do is they really skip a lot of the early phases of Jesus' ministry. All right? So they kind of jump right to the baptism and, you know, then the arrest of John the Baptist, which is our lesson for today. Okay? Just work through it. And one of the things John does is he focuses on some of these early days of the gospel because John was with Jesus during these early days. So since he's an eyewitness, he can tell what others cannot. You know, what others cannot. So John follows Jesus to Jerusalem for probably that first Passover during his ministry, and that's where Jesus cleanses the temple, and I'm going to say it this way, for the first time. For the first time. Okay, so let's read John 2, verses 14 through 17. John chapter 2, verses 14 through 17.
In the temple courts, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, "Get these out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a market." His disciples remembered that it is written, "Zeal for your house will consume me."
Okay. So when you think about this, and you look at John's gospel, and we understand it being the first time that he overturns the money changers' tables, do you think having that happen early in his ministry provides any kind of strategic purpose in Jesus' ministry? Can you think of anything strategic about overturning the money changer table this early in his ministry? Now, that's John chapter 2, and we're obviously further along in chapter 4. But
he was saying he was going to change things.
He was going to change things, right?
I think that the first time that he actually acknowledged who he was, he says, "Do not make my Father's house a house of prayer.
Yeah, do not make my Father's house. Yeah, he's acknowledging himself. He's going to make changes. And so what happens here, this happens, and Jesus, when you think about kind of the overall scheme of things, Jesus becomes an overnight sensation, right? He becomes an overnight sensation. The masses hated all the temple corruption. They hated all these kind of rules. It's kind of like these extra taxes and all these things they had to pay just to go and to worship God. And of course, it's sort of like one of those things that we talk about all the time when we talk about, well, someone has to do it, right? And what they were doing was there's nobody named someone around here. What they were looking for was somebody who would stand up to them. And so guess what happens? Jesus does. He stands up to them. He became, I guess maybe a way to put it, he became a champion of the people, right? And because of that, the word about Jesus spread. So they had heard about the things that he had done in Jerusalem. Now, the fact that now everybody is learning about Jesus, that really opens doors when he goes to other villages. Because there are people there who know who he is, what he's done. They kind of welcome him as a hero. This is the guy who told those crooks in the temple they had had enough of this stuff. And so here's what's happening. Jesus' popularity is just exploding. But here starts the problem. Okay, who's in charge of the temple? Sadducees, right? Okay, they are not happy with Jesus. They are not happy with Jesus. All right? But who do you think might be happy at this point in time with Jesus? The Pharisees. The Pharisees be happy with Jesus because what he did is he disrupted everything that the Sadducees were really doing and stood for. He interrupted their revenue stream at the busiest time of their year. The Pharisees are loving this, all right? The Pharisees controlled the synagogues in all these little outlying towns, and these outlying towns are welcoming Jesus, right? Hey, come on in. Go ahead and speak in our synagogues, all right? And so Jesus shows up in the villages, and we find that even the Pharisees are going to be welcoming here at first. Okay? And so I think as we understand that, we understand why Jesus' ministry just, boom, was just exploding, okay? This cleansing of the temple really pushed him into the public eye. But as Jesus continued traveling and he was teaching and he was preaching, he was amassing all of these followers. And then he starts running into the problem with the Pharisees. Their enthusiasm now is starting to sour a little bit. Maybe it's a good way to put it, right? Starting to sour a little bit. Why? Because Jesus was preaching a different kind of kingdom than the Pharisees were. So he's preaching something different from what they are. He rebuked all their legalism. He welcomed sinners. And so soon what you have going on is they are turning against Jesus as well. Yet despite their opposition, Jesus continues to draw massive crowds everywhere he went. Now, because he's taken a dig at the Pharisees, now the Sadducees are happy with him. Okay? They're happy. They're delighted with Jesus. They hated the Pharisees so much, and now what Jesus was doing was making them look like fools. That Jesus was just so much outpacing them as he went from town to town. And a few years passed. Jesus knows time is coming when he's going to have to achieve the purpose he came for. That he's going to have to go to the cross. And so what he kind of has to do, think about it kind of in terms like this, he kind of has to unite the Sadducees and the Pharisees together against him. All right? They all have to be against him. All right? And so he goes to Jerusalem. Okay, and that's where we pick up with the cleansing of the temple the second time that you'll read about in the Synoptic Gospels. Okay? And so I'm going to put my reference down, so I'll just go ahead and read it. And Jesus entered the temple, this is the second time, and drove out all who sold and bought in the temple, and he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he said to them, "It is written, my house shall be called the house of prayer, but you make it a den of robbers." And the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. But the chief priests and the scribes saw the wonderful things that he did. And the children crying out in the temple, "Hosanna to the Son of David," they were indignant. Okay?
Pastor, where is that second side?
That's what I'm saying. I forgot to write it down. That's why I read it. So I'm going to have to find it now. I mean, we can look at each one of the synoptic gospels and pull it out. I just can't remember which one it was.
Okay.
You should see my desk at home. I got everything piled everywhere. So I got to look this up. So I have to move this book over here, and then move this book over here, and then this one over here. Yeah.
So we
And I just forgot to write it down.
Everything's in your deck. I thought you were reading from your cheat sheet.
Well, it is. It's in my notes. I wrote it in my notes, but I didn't write the reference down, which I usually do. So,
We'll forgive you.
all right. Thank you. As we say, grace is spoken here. Thanks be to God, right? And so going in the second time to overturn the money changer's table, it again accomplishes some pretty key objectives. Okay? So when he goes in the second time, now he's got the Sadducees and the Pharisees kind of united against him. And what they're doing is they're putting aside kind of their differences and going to the Romans and trying to solicit them to help get rid of Jesus, okay? And once they're all united and ready to go, it only takes, what, 5 days, less than 5 days, for them to get Jesus on the cross, okay?
How do we know that one or the other is not reporting the same incident?
Okay. Well, the reason we know, okay, we say like in John's gospel, what he's doing, he reports those early days of Jesus' ministry, some of the things that you don't see. Like, for example, these two miracles we're talking about are only in John's gospel. They're not in the synoptics at all.
You said the second.
Yeah. The second one takes place during the week of the Passion that are reported by Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Okay, and so they're two different times. All right, and so one of the things it did is Jesus was trying to say here is, this temple doesn't belong to them. Who does it belong to? It belongs to God. And so what we see happening, during that week is we see them just challenging time and time again Jesus' authority. And one of the things we find is, don't pick an argument with Jesus, right? You're not going to win this argument, all right? And so, Jesus kind of basically proving them wrong, time and time again. It's just making their anger just do what? Go through the roof. And so Jesus at this point in time then is forcing Israel to make the choice. They could choose him as their Messiah, or they could choose to side with the Pharisees and Sadducees, whom he is at this point in time soundly defeated. And one of the things, I'm looking at this and I'm studying what's going on in the background, and I'm going, man, Jesus is a tactical genius. I mean, just the way that he goes about things. Much in the same way, I like the way Paul makes his arguments. All right? And so this is what we see happening. And so he's got this reception, as we get back to our reading, he's got this great reception, you know, as he gets back. Okay? And so in verses 46 and 47, we've got the problem. Now, what's the problem being addressed?
There was someone that was ill, son.
Yes.
Yeah, the official's son was sick. He was near death. You know, Jesus has made his way back to Cana, as we discussed. And it was the place, again, he performed his first miracle, turning the water into wine. And now what's going to happen is he's going to build upon that particular miracle. Okay? And so we hear here that just a certain royal official, remember, you asked me, all I know is it's a certain official, okay, that's unnamed, travels from Capernaum to Cana. Now that's a distance of roughly 20 miles, okay, roughly 20 miles, and he goes there to see Jesus and plead with him to heal his son who's apparently near death. That's the problem. That's the problem that's going to be addressed. And so then, how does Jesus respond? There in verse 48. How does Jesus respond?
Unless you people see signs and wonders, you will by no means believe.
So your translation says, you people?
Unless you people. People is italicized.
Yeah, that's because, you know, like for example, the ESV says, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. And you can't see it in the English, which is why they put people in italics. But this is a plural. So what he's saying is, unless you all, okay, yeah, y'all, unless y'all see signs and wonders, you're not going to believe. All right, so what he's doing is he's addressing a group of people. He's not just talking to this official, okay? So just kind of indicating to us that there's more than just him in Jesus' presence at this time. So some commentators, this is where you kind of get differences of opinion. Some commentators believe that Jesus tells the official, what he tells him is really somewhat of a rebuke. You know, he's really kind of waving his finger at him. You know, they're following him and welcoming him only because of the signs and the wonders that he does. In other words, where does their faith actually reside?
In Jesus.
Only in the miracle.
Well, their faith, what he's telling them is, your faith only resides in all of these signs and wonders. Your faith is not resting in me, in who I am and what I do, or what I'm going to do for you. And so what you see here is kind of, faith takes kind of two different paths. You know, he's trying to tell them, either you believe in who I am, or you believe just in the signs and wonders. But there are other commentators that say Jesus' response is not a rebuke of weak faith, where it's a rebuke of, he's not rebuking them for having weak faith and being there seeking proof. The purpose, if we look at John's gospel and how John addresses it, really comes to play. Here's the reference, Crystal. John chapter 20, different reference by the way, verses 30 and 31. What does he say there? John chapter 20, verses 30 and 31.
Jesus did many other miraculous signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name.
Okay. So what does that tell us? What does that tell us?
He did a lot more than was recorded.
Yeah, he did a lot more than what people, are recorded here for people to read, right? Anything else? These things are written so that what? So that you may believe, right? And that by believing in his name, you may have life in his name. And so in John's gospel, he talks about these signs, so what he's saying is the signs and the words of Jesus are actually trying to achieve the same purpose. Okay? It's all here so that you may believe that he is the Christ.
I'm thinking back, the ones that they chose to report are raising the dead, lepers, healing the blind, all that. He did more of a concern about, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this.
Yeah. One of the things as I started working on next week's, I said, okay, we've had water into wine, we've got the healing. Next week is the feeding of the 5,000, which is actually recorded in more than just John. But that's going to be our gospel lesson next week. And then the next one is Jesus walking on water. That's the gospel lesson in 2 weeks. So I said, well, we're going to kind of talk about those over the next 2 weeks. So then the next one then is another healing. So you see in John's gospel, I think he concentrates a little more on the healings than really anything else. But there are other miracles out there. So it's just, to me, it's, I said, oh. At the risk of being redundant, we'll take a look at them, okay? But what he's trying to do, what John's trying to do is saying what Jesus is doing throughout his ministry is he is trying to reveal who he is as the Son of God and what he does for life in this world. All right? And he wants people to see that. Now, one of the things I like to do when I teach confirmation, I like to appeal to different types of learning. There are some people who learn because they hear it. There are others who learn because they see it. And there are others who learn because they do it. All right? And so what John's trying to do here in his gospel is trying to demonstrate, really, to all these different type of learning types, who Jesus is and what Jesus means to them. Okay? It's just kind of an important way that John goes about that. So what is the sign that Jesus gives the official there in verses 49 through 53? Why don't we go ahead and read it so it'll come to somebody as we read it. So 49 through 53, let's read that again.
The nobleman said to him, Sir, come down before my child dies. Jesus said to him, Go your way, your son lives. So the man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him, and he went his way. And as he was now going down, his servants met him and told him, saying, Your son lives. Then he inquired of them the hour when he got better. And they said to him, Yesterday at the 7th hour the fever left him. So the fathers knew that it was at the same hour in which Jesus said to him, Your son lives. And he himself believed, and his whole household.
Okay, so the sign is what? What's that?
Spoken word
Spoken word which did what?
to heal the son.
Healed the son. All right? So here's the sign that Jesus gives. It's the healing. It's the healing. It's the miraculous giving of life from the threat of death. And the official isn't turned away by what Jesus said. You get an indication of that when you read it? Just basically said, Jesus said, so the man kind of went, okay, thanks. kind of went on his way, right? But you see, what happens here at first is this man comes and he throws himself at Jesus' mercy, doesn't he? You know, he wants Jesus to come before his child dies. And does Jesus go?
No.
No. He just tells him, hey, don't worry about it. Your son will live. Okay? And so here's where it gets a little bit tricky. Because in essence, what he's saying to Jesus is that he has to come with him in order for his child to be healed. And unless Jesus makes it in time, according to whose desire? His, right? Unless Jesus does what he wants him to do, he can do nothing.
Oops.
All right? How many times have we said, Jesus, if you only... Yeah, I think everybody in the room can raise their hand. And I think, too, the churches would be full. Isn't that a promise? Lord, I would go to church every Sunday if you just take care of this for me, right? So, I guess one thing that surprised me here is we don't see Jesus commenting on these limitations that this official is really placing upon him and has basically relayed to Jesus that these are necessary. If my son's going to be healed, you must come, you must do the healing, we got to get there in time, let's get a move on. Okay? But when you really think about it, that's a limitation of the man's faith. Right? The fact that he's putting the constraint upon Jesus, that's a limitation of his faith. The way I like to describe it is, what this man is doing is he's putting Jesus in a box. He says, you know, this is what Jesus will be doing and how he looks to me, and he's got to fit all neat in that box, that there's no way Jesus can function in my life outside of that box that I have created for him. All right? And we do that too, don't we? We put Jesus in the box sometimes too. And so what you see happening here is Jesus really taking notice of that. And so Jesus is trying to turn this man's faith in another direction. He just tells him, hey, go, and your son will live. Now, I want us to notice something here. And I don't know, this is kind of the stuff that I kind of look for. But I noticed that Jesus, one, didn't turn the man away, did he? But I find it interesting that he doesn't say, no, I won't go, you know. That he's going to tell him, no, I'm not going to do it. But what Jesus is really trying to do here is give an indication that, hey, it's not necessary for him to go to Capernaum to grant this man's prayer right then and there. And so as we read the story, I mean, it may not seem like much, right? But it's really, I think, a really big deal. Okay? There's no need for all this additional suspense. There's no need for me to go and do what it is you want me to do. He says, I will do what I will do, and it will take place.
You know, he's all-knowing and all-powerful.
Yeah. Omniscient, omnipotent, right?
It seems like this time, though, this is someone who didn't profess belief, who's asking for God's
Right.
intercession or involvement to give him this miracle, but doesn't say,
Doesn't say I believe before he goes. Right. You're right. Because what happens afterwards? What happens at the end? He believes in as well as his household. And so here is somebody Jesus knows is coming to him who does not have faith per se, okay? But remember, Jesus is kind of well known throughout the area. People know about him. They know what he's been doing, all right? And so, it's sort of like you hear people today, well, I hear if I go here that, that I can get help for whatever my ailment is. Well, next week is we'll talk about the man being healed in the pools of Bethesda. There in Jerusalem. We'll talk about that. But it's the same kind of thing. It's like, I believe that if I go and get in the pool and the water is stirred, I will be healed. It's the same kind of thing. He believes that if he goes and sees Jesus, Jesus is well known now, that Jesus will heal him because he asked for him. All right? But Jesus is trying to tell him, what you need is faith. I don't need to be there for this to take place. I don't need that. I don't need to do that for you. You need to have faith that what I tell you is going to come to pass. Okay? And so, in essence, what's happening is, this man is, coming before him and begging, and it's almost like a prayer. Lord, you have to come and you have to heal my son. And what Jesus is in essence doing here is granting an answer to that prayer while the man is right in front of him. He's telling him, go, your son's going to be healed. And what do we hear the man did? The man believed his word, right? Believed the word of Jesus, and he went on his way. So Jesus has corrected a man's understanding that, hey, I have to be in the presence for him to do the things that God does. Now, what does this tell us? The power to heal lies in the person of Jesus. And it's a matter of his will and word, not one of his physical presence or what it is we want. Okay? And that's a difficult thing for us to take sometimes. And again, as you read the story, it doesn't seem like much, but it really is a big deal. Because it's on the word of Jesus now that this man's faith now rests. In Jesus' word to him, and Jesus telling him, go, your son's gonna live, it's like what Jesus is giving him is a divine pledge or promise. He's telling him, hey, this is going to happen, right? So it's sort of like an unconditional assurance. There's nothing else this man has to do. It's just Jesus is taking care of it. All right. And so now I think what we see is faith is kindled in the heart of this man. Okay. And the power of Jesus' word. I think I want to add that. And the power of Jesus' word. Okay? He doesn't have to wait till he gets home for the validity, because what happens? What happens? The servants come, okay? And they come, what, the 7th hour of the day? Right? That's when they told them the fever broke, right? Now, anybody remember how they kind of keep time? The day started when? So here's the 7th hour of the day, that this is happening. And so what he does is he recognizes this is about the same time Jesus told him, hey, go, your son's going to live. All right? So these servants come and tell him, and he recognizes what it is that's going on. Now, when you read this, and if you're just reading and you're not trying to study it, you'll look at this and you'll say, oh, okay, just some extra information, the service come at the 7th hour of the day. Doesn't really mean that much if you're just trying to read it. But it's extremely important to the man, because Jesus made this promise to him, and so it's important for him to connect that promise when Jesus made it So when the healing took place. And that, excuse me, and that's what the servants are doing. You know, now there's something to think about. The fever broke. Okay? Now, a lot of times, if you get something like that happen, what are you going to do? You're still going to keep an eye on the person, right? Just in case there's like a relapse, right? And so you can see the servants really kind of holding back, not wanting to give good news if potentially bad news was to follow. All right? And so here the servants come. They come really right away. And so if you think of a healing like this, think of the healing of Peter's mother-in-law. Right? They come out of the temple, they go to Peter's house, and his mother is sick, and and so Jesus goes and heals her, and so she gets up and serves them. Right? Fixes dinner or something. Think about it kind of in terms like that. The healing is instantaneous. All right? So, usually when you have a fever, what? It's a hint something worse is going on, right? You might have some sort of virus infection or whatever might be going on. So the indication here is that this healing, for the servants to come out and tell him, hey, this boy is healed, I mean, what that would indicate is a complete healing has taken place. And it's with the revealing of the hour then that the miracle is revealed. All right? One that was even really greater than the man hoped for. He thought he was going to have to wait till Jesus got there. He doesn't have to wait till Jesus got there. Just that his word was taken care of. All right? And because of that, the man and all of his household, joined him in faith. Okay? There's kind of the story. So what makes this a miracle now, given our previous definition? This is the point of the lesson. We always get the crickets. Well, what has transpired could only have happened by the healing hand of God. Right? This boy was near death. There was nothing anybody could do for him. God's whole, healing hand has reached down, touched this boy. There's no human interaction. And his healing could not be explained any other way. Right? Family believed he was near death, but through this miracle, his decline was reversed and he was restored to health. There is the miracle. Okay, fitted in our definition.
It was a long distance.
Yeah, long distance.
The guy had to walk, apparently, for at least a day to get there, because he talks about the fever left him yesterday when he was returning.
Yeah.
So that implies it took some time to get from Cana to
Capernaum. Now, remember I said it's like a distance of like 20 miles. That's a long walk. Well, you would know, you hike. Not that far though, right?
Is there a difference between a miracle and a sign?
Well, remember we talked last week about providence versus a miracle. A miracle is really strictly just divine. That it has to be God reaching into the reality of His creation to make something happen, versus providence, which uses kind of the things that God has created in such a way that it allows something to happen, bring about a healing. Medicine, okay? Medicine would fit into providence and things like that. Doctors, nurses, yeah. One of the things I pray for a lot of times when people are going into surgery, that what God is going to do is guide the hands of these doctors and nurses that are caring for them. He has invested so much in them, given them the skills necessary to do what they do, that God's hand would be with them during the surgery. So, yeah. Okay, so the fact that this is the second sign Jesus did, is that important? What do you think?
Well, it was the fluke. I mean, he could do it more than once.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think what we see here is, John really tying it back to the first miracle, because it's where? It's in Cana. It's where it's happening, where he did the first miracle. I don't think that's happenstance. Now, last week we tied the water into wine. What did we tie that to? We tied that to Jesus' death on the cross, remember? This week we've got the raising of an official son. So what would we associate that with? It's his resurrection, right? Remember, these things are written so that you may believe, and whoever believes in Jesus has eternal life. So, I think this is good. We'll see. Remember the story in the Old Testament? Israelites, to use David's term, have gone off the rails. Okay? And because of that, they're being bitten by all these snakes. Right? I'll put my feet up. That's all right. I'm not liking the snakes. And what was happening was they were bitten by the snakes and they were dying in the wilderness. And they looked at this bronze serpent on a pole that Moses had, and they lived. All right? And so what we see here is the cross of Christ would provide for Israel new life for all who believe. Okay? For all who believe.
Wouldn't that be a miracle when he touched that, made it into a snake or whatever?
Well, if you remember the magicians, they were able to do kind of the same thing. So, so it was just kind of interesting. You're talking about, when in the plagues against Egypt. So, these are things that really only God can do. You can't do it by sleight of hand or anything like that. It's just, I can remember I did a children's message once, and I did kind of a magic trick for them, and I was trying to make a point. Well, one of the children said, "Pastor, God doesn't like us to believe in magic." You talk about losing the group right there. All right, let's pray. I think we're done today. But here we've got this miracle now to take away of healing the official son, and it shows us Jesus has the power to heal us both physically and spiritually. But I should say it also demonstrates the importance of faith without sight. Remember, I guess it was about a month or so ago, we talked about the unseen presence in our life. The official believed the words of Jesus, trusted that his son would be healed, and Jesus honored his faith by doing what he had promised. Okay? So that is the second miracle. Any other comments before we close?
Well, I was just thinking, a magician may make a snake, but he couldn't heal these people with that.
Mm-hmm. Right, it could. Which I think will be kind of one of the important lessons that kind of comes out of next week's lesson, the healing of the man at the pool of Bethesda. Because it's belief in something else that brings the healing, not belief in Jesus. So we're going to see that dichotomy, if you will, coming out next week.
And I think it's interesting that there's the number 7 on the 7th hour.
On the 7th hour. See, I got you guys thinking of numerology, don't I? Woo-hoo!
Pastor, we're not supposed to believe in that.
Numerology and understanding what numbers mean in Scripture. That's what I'm talking about. You're right. I think you're thinking astrology, right? Yeah, we don't believe in that either, so. Okay? All right, well, let's rise and let's close with the Lord's Prayer. We pray. Our Father,
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
All right, blessings. We'll see you next in worship.